Hey everyone, Steve from the Imagination Games team here, and I'm going to take you on a little tour of our Skill Create feature. We like to refer to it as our Skill Forge. First, we're going to go into the Create menu and click on Skills. At a top level, what you see here is your skill library. This is made up of skills that you have created and saved. From here, the skill library, as you're creating characters, you can take any of these skills and add them to characters. Or if you found a character or downloaded a character that has interesting skills, you can actually copy them back to your library for later use. Now from here, I'm going to jump into creating a new skill. And what you'll see here is just our basic skill creation interface. This allows you, by answering a few simple questions and kind of stepping through our wizard, to quickly create a skill. We also have a very deep advanced system that gives you many more options that are reflected in the basic skills but go a lot deeper. I will cover that in a later video, but for now I'm just going to walk you through some of the basics. So the first decision you have to make is what kind of skill is this? Is this an attack or a support skill? Is this offensive or defensive? And for this demo, I'm going to do an attack, an offensive skill. From there, you choose one of the different the action types: melee, beam, projectile, direct, area, and aura. And just to walk through these real quick, melee attacks are like your typical punches, kicks, jump kicks, things like that. Oftentimes, attacks using weapons also. Your beam attack is an attack that gets emitted from your character in some fashion, but stays attached to its origin. Unlike the next one, the projectile, which is emitted from your character or a weapon or something like that, but ultimately detaches from the origin. A direct attack has no flight. It's kind of like a projectile, but has no flight and just directly impacts the enemy or ally in the case of a buff. Area attack is what most people are familiar with. It's an area of effect attack, an explosion that emits from the character itself. Show you an example. There we go. And then finally, an aura attack. This is one where you actually apply an aura or a field to your character that has some sort of effect on nearby characters. But again, for the beginning of this video, I'm just going to start with a melee attack. It's a little bit easier. From there, you then choose a damage type. We have 5 primary damage types: physical, energy, electric, cold, and fire. These primarily come into play relative to defenses, shields, skin types of your enemy. For example, if you're doing a fire attack, it does significantly more damage to characters that have a cold or ice skin type. Or maybe they have a shield that only shields them from particular types of damage. And if fire isn't one of them, the fire does additional damage. So for now, I'm going to do, why don't we do fire, since we've been talking about that. These also oftentimes will affect the visual effect that is defaulted for the attack. You should see it on the character. He has a little bit of a fire hand. The next is, what type of modifiers do you get for this skill? Basically, what happens to this skill, or what changes do you want to make before the attack actually impacts an enemy or another character? So in this case, it's things like your cooldown. How long before the character can initiate this skill again? Maybe we'll make it a shorter cooldown. It'll just be 3 seconds. And then how much energy does it cost to cast? Energy or mana, depending on what you're familiar with. We're going to make this a high energy cost. And one of the things you'll notice as I'm modifying these options is this number down here, what we call the power rating for this skill, is changing. As I make this a better or more powerful skill by, say, reducing the cooldown, you'll notice that number goes up. It becomes a more powerful attack, or the rating goes up. In contrast, I can actually make that power rating go down by making this a little bit more expensive, let's say. If it costs more energy to cast or more mana, you'll notice this goes down. Or as I reduce the energy cost, it goes back up. So it's always going to be a bit of a balancing game between how powerful, damaging, easy to cast is your attack or buff versus what kind of trade-offs are you making. Additional options are what kind of attack this is, what the mode is, we call it. So traditionally, there's just your instant and a basic attack. We also have a charge attack if you want to charge it up over a period of time by, say, holding down the mouse or the button that triggers it. It then potentially does more damage to the enemy, depending on the range that you set for your damage. Additionally, there's a maintain power, so you can hold it and continue to do power, but also typically incur an extra energy cost for every additional kind of tick of damage as you're maintaining it. So in this case, I'm just going to do a normal instant. And then you can define an arc for a melee attack, which defines how many enemies within kind of an area. I'll do 180, which is all the area around in front of your character. Does it actually impact? So you'll see now in the demo, it actually impacts both characters, as well as changing the animation that the character is doing. Or I can even do 360, and you'll notice that it'll impact all the characters around my character as I do this attack. Oh, except for the character behind you is typically an ally, just in case you're looking at buffs. Another thing you'll notice what I just did was using the right mouse button. If I click and hold it, I can actually manipulate this little viewer here so I can get a better view. I can also use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And I'm going to remove this front arc. I'll give it a little bit of front arc. We'll do 120 degrees. And then finally, to finish off the attack, you choose the impact type. What happens when this actually hits an enemy? So that's things like how much damage does it do? This scales from minimal to extreme, or you can even do 0 damage. Maybe there's a different type of effect you're looking for out of this attack. So I'll do a low attack. Does it do damage over time? And if it does, how many ticks of damage over that time? Maybe it's 2, 3, 4, 5 ticks of damage per second, or bits of damage per second. So we'll do 3, let's say, and you'll notice now this character catches on fire and takes damage. Does it do knockback damage? We have different types of knockback. It can knock them down, it can knock them back, it can repel them, which just knocks them backwards. Should be able to see that in this viewing window in a second. Knocks them back, they can come running back. Does it do any sort of debuff? Does it reduce the amount of damage they can do? Does it reduce their accuracy? Does it slow them down? Or does it lessen their resistance to types of damage? Maybe I'll do a speed buff. And this percentage here is determining how much does it reduce things like their speed. So in this case, 100% slowdown would cut their speed in half. Oops, let's go back to the next. We'll go back. And then finally, holds. There are different types of holds depending on what sort of effect you want to have on enemies. You can always mouse over any of these options. You'll get a bit of a tooltip that gives you more information on what they do. So in this case, a stun will stun the target so they can actually walk and continue to move, albeit slowly, but they can't use any powers. A hold is ultimately a complete hold where they cannot walk or use their powers. Root roots them in place so they cannot move, but they can initiate powers. Sleep actually holds the target in place, but it's one of the holds that will actually break on damage so that they can move again as well as cast skills. And finally, Confuse actually doesn't hold them necessarily so much as it initiates an attack on, it flips their concept of allies versus enemies. So they are more likely to attack their allies than their enemies if they are confused. And those are the basics. I can now give this melee attack a name. We'll say Fire Punch, and I can save it. This now goes into my skill library. If I want to apply it to a character, I can actually go back to Create. I'll save that. I'll go into my Void Stalker character. I will edit this character. I will go to his skills. And now in my skill library, I see this Fire Punch I just created, and I can add that to the character. Now, if I want to create a new skill, just to give you a few more examples, some of the other unique things that you can set for things like, say, a beam attack. I'll do an energy beam attack. These are all the same options, but on impact, you have a few other options, like does it penetrate enemies? So especially for a beam attack, you sometimes want it to actually go through the enemy. You'll see it now starts to go through the character. Or does it chain? And if it chains, how many times can it chain between characters? So you'll now see this beam attack actually bouncing from one character to the next. In the advanced options, you can actually modify things like the angle and degree to which a chain attack will bounce, or whether it will bounce back and forth between a character that's already been impacted by that chain. But again, we'll cover those mostly in another session. Canceling that and jumping back in, some of the unique things for projectiles, you can determine things like what type of projectile is it? Does it home in on a target? Or is it a grenade? Does it bounce and ultimately explode? Does it have, actually I'm going to change the visual effect. Is it a multi-shot? Can it split into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different projectiles as it comes out of the character? And then what's the range and the speed of the projectiles? I can make these very short, very slow projectiles, which is kind of fun to see. And again, all of these affects the power rating. Projectiles and beams also have additional impact options. Things like, does it chain? Is it explosive? Does it cause area damage when it impacts an enemy? Or shrapnel? Does it actually kick out a bunch of additional projectiles after it impacts an enemy? These can result in some really incredible visual effects coming out and doing incredible damage, but they also make the power rating go up significantly because the potential for damage, especially across multiple enemies, goes up significantly. I'll save that because that's fun, and I'll do a couple more attacks. Direct attacks, they can have an area of effect when they directly affect an enemy. Let's see if this will do that demo real quick. And you see that that actually affects multiple enemies near it. Go back in and show you some additional options for area attacks. You can determine things like the radius and what angle the cone impacts. So it could be right in front of yourself. It could be all around you, so 360. It could be very short. Yeah, if it has a cone angle that is less than 360, it can look more like a cone attack or like a flamethrower, which is kind of cool. And finally, we'll take a quick look at the aura attack, which again casts an aura on yourself that then has an effect on enemies nearby. So we'll do cold damage, give it a cool down. You can determine the radius of how far away enemies, we'll do fire, why not, have to be affected by your aura, ultimately what the range is. And then you can decide what kind of effect it has on enemies that fall within that range. And that is it for the basics of skills. I can dive a little bit deeper into supports. The biggest difference with support, there is the self-support option for things like healing, giving yourself defense buffs. There are the special powers that initiate things like speed boosts, accuracy boosts, specials like invisibility, shrinking, which reduces the opportunity for damage, growth, which makes you bigger and stronger. These have a very cool visual effect associated with them. There's also additional defensive buffs that you can add to your character, as well as shields that you can initiate. And you can determine how strong things like the shield is and what type of damage it protects you from. Stun protection, dodging, reduction, things like that. And there you have it. So that's the basic overview of our SkillForge, our skill creation tool. In the next video, again, I will go deeper into the advanced options, which includes things like customizing the actual visual effects and the animations that are used to cast the effect. And then going really deep on the different status effects that you can do at the end of an attack once it impacts a character. And that's how you can really start refining these really interesting types of skills. So until next time, I'm signing off.